It also provides you more flexibility to one unit on one and three on the other.
The one I was going to say is we have the two parking lots, one for ideas we want to capture and carry forward. Things we're not going to dwell on the some of the questions.
Questions, general questions on anything?
On anything. So, in general, people are going to ask questions. There's not a lot of time.
Aren't we supposed to not write on the wall?
There's post-its.
What do we do?
There's post-its.
Oh, you write on the post-it.
Right on the post-its, stick it on the
Okay.
wall.
Okay, you want me to announce that?
Announce that, yeah.
Okay.
So if people have deeper questions, things are going to run longer, or ideas that haven't really, aren't going to be
Okay.
carried forward, you'll need to stick them on those.
Okay. No. Yeah. Bring your computer. People have brought their computer. But do you want it up on screen? Just want to read them. Yeah, just bring your computer up here. Okay. So good afternoon. My name is Martin Fortier. I'm the Executive Director of ArcticNet, and you'll hear more about me tomorrow. But I was selected as the largest executive committee member, and the one that would bring you off the stage after 2 minutes. But I now have the pleasure to tell you that you have 4 minutes because you're both going to report on the two sessions at the same time, so you don't come here twice. And we'll go in chronological order and start with the first working group. I hope your working group sessions were, fruitful. I guess you'll tell us that, if they were or not, in a few minutes. But I will time you because we have short amount of time, and we need to have discussions also. So either I don't know, if you want to have questions, maybe a couple of questions after each rapporteur, but really maybe have discussions at the end. I'm sure there'll be a lot of overlapping issues. Also, it was pointed out to me that without writing on the walls, there are some boards there, or questions or ideas. So beside Ellen there is the idea board. And you actually don't write on the wall, there's some post-its, and you write on the post-it and then you stick it on the wall. So I guess that's allowed. Because from down here, it looks like you wrote ideas right on the wall. And then if you have questions, so this, for example, this goes really fast. We've already done the first two working groups. If there are some ideas that just, either you didn't have an opportunity to mention or really important things, just put them there and they'll be collected, or questions by the organizers. I guess we'll leave them there, Craig, all week, those two boards there?
We'll capture what's on the boards today, and then the boards will stay up.
Yeah, so every day you'll have the boards, and if it's a very important question, just repeat it every day, and then they'll get the hang of it. So first, I'd like to invite Rapporteur for Group 1, please. Is any rapporteur going to want to use the screen? 1, 2, 3? No? You will? Come on. Are you number 8 or? Okay. All right. Then we'll leave it there for Mary Beth.
Is it on?
Yep. The screen. Oh, you need a projector?
Yeah, maybe it's better if we're gonna have 4 minutes.
Is your show on? Well, your time is counting now. It's 3 minutes.
Okay. Forget it.
If you really want it, we can load it up.
Okay, so my name is Magnus Tannefelt. I'm reporting from Group 1, which was chaired by Peter Schlosser, on the status of current observing systems. And I'll just run through this, of course. And we didn't exactly follow the questions that we were tasked to, but so I'll just tell you what we talked about, and that's kind of issues that we addressed. And we immediately realized that we're only a subset of the community that should be involved, so we do not fully representative all aspects. And for the session 1, so I'll do both sessions in a row.
Yeah, if you could just maybe repeat what the theme you were
Yeah.
addressing at the beginning.
So for this for the status of current observing systems. The first session was to prioritize findings, questions, and ideas for recommendations from the white papers and from the working sessions, and identify subsets of tractable issues that AOS will develop into recommendations. And the first question was if the white papers accurately identified top priority issues and questions. We didn't spend too much time on that. We rather went down to the second question, which addresses the critical issues that are missing. But we identified that there was a gap in the white papers regarding the issue of carbon dynamics and carbon budgets that was not that we have not found being addressed enough compared to its importance. We divided the second question into three topics that we should be addressing and using the existing network so we don't duplicate what is being done already. But regarding spatial and temporal dimensions, looking at terrestrial and marine systems, the measurements are often not taken in the optimal locations. They're rather taken where it's logistically feasible, which is a question or an issue to address. We could also look at differences between these systems, marine and terrestrial and coastal and so on. We talked about the status in the Russian system, which used to be well covered when it comes to observations, both in the Northern Sea route and the terrestrial system, but after the 1980s, as you know, there are much less observations. This is getting better, but then on the other hand, it's getting more difficult to get data access. So, but this is not true for all subjects, but for many of them. And the recommendation is to ensure continuity and development of remote sensing and its connections to ground-based observations regarding those issues. When it comes to science questions, multidisciplinary dimensions are paid too little attention, we found. So we should sustain and strengthen multi-purpose flagship platforms, for example, the TIXI Observatory, the Ny-Ålesund community, Tulik Lake, and so on, and use them as templates and extend some of them to become super sites, but at the same time we need to maintain a diversity of different types of sites, large, medium, and small. They are all needed for different purposes. We need both direct observations with real-time data transmission and comprehensive process studies. The recommendation is to encourage technological development and evolution towards modern technology while maintaining traditional measurements so we don't lose data and time series. I'll go over to stakeholder issues. We discussed that quite a bit. And adaptation of human societies is a key issue, as you all know. Definition of overarching questions to be addressed by scientists should more often be developed in dialogue with local communities and other stakeholders. And AOS could agree on a set of overarching reference questions to help guide the appraisal of observing networks. How are we doing with time?
You're done 30 minutes ago, 30 seconds ago.
Okay.
You're way past your time.
Yeah, we didn't really have time to synthesize this, I'm afraid. So one of the important stakeholders, as we heard earlier today, is industry, and that has to be better integrated in observing networks and data capture and dissemination. So I'll skip over to session 2 then, which dealt with the context of the AOS priorities. I'll just mention a few of the things that we talked about. That the AOS has a role to create a mechanism to balance different sectors and to identify gaps in the multidisciplinary dimension, and we lack a system design that is created to, or designed as a system rather than just networking between different existing observations. And the recommendation is to assemble an international group that is funded to do this and has a real mandate to influence long-term funding and infrastructure investments. And we can use examples from atmospheric sciences and other or regional initiatives. I think I'll stop there actually. Thank you.
You were the first, and all the other ones are doing their summary while you're speaking, so it's okay that you're. Yeah, it's not fair, but that's just it. Tomorrow you can go last, okay? We'll go in verse order tomorrow. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You're working the whole week. You didn't know, so I'll ask Rapporteur for working group 2 now.
I'll just do it from here.
Can you
These on?
get this on? No, they can activate it. That's okay.
Are we on? Oh, good. Okay, hi, Dave Atkinson here. So we were also looking at data issues, and I'm just going to punch right through this in no particular order. So first one on our list is industry collaboration, and this was just mentioned. Private sector involvement in Arctic observing is currently a huge gap. We know that there are lots of companies up there doing all sorts of observational work, but we really can't access it. So 2 recommendations for the short-term timescale. Before the next AOS meeting, the World Ocean Council will lead an initiative to gather industry partners with academic input to formally raise the question of Arctic data sharing and joint data collection programs. And also before the next AOS, a subset of the group will identify successful case studies of industry data sharing examples, so as a possible template for others to perhaps follow. Okay, international ship-based coordination. So this was identified as also a serious gap. So there is no good way to coordinate ship-based observations and data currently in place. So recommendations. Get countries to chip in for joint operation of icebreakers, particularly Polarstern.
That's the IRIS project.
Okay. Also, sort of notably absent from the discussion were Russian icebreakers in this. Also commented there are lots of icebreakers in the Beaufort, but there's no coordination at all. We need some sort of advanced planning of activities and then post-mission coordination of new and accumulated data sets. So a recommendation from this, establish or build up an existing forum, establish a new forum or build up an existing forum to coordinate this, such as the Pacific Arctic Group. Comments about GEOS, Global Earth Observing System of Systems, just 2 I guess, comments or recommendations to better delve into representation of the Arctic within that. So for the next AOS meeting, we need more formal involvement of GEOS, a presentation or something of how they can help the Arctic community for observing. And we need to determine how the Arctic research community is represented in the context of GEOS. For example, the link through SAON might not be sufficient. Max. Okay, some data issues. One thing that was noted as a gap in the white papers was the issue of data rescue. So there are a lot of data sets that are available in the Arctic that are in formats that are not really available to the broader community. So these really need to somehow be reintegrated back into public service in a sense. So data rescue and delivery, we need training, some sort of training program for grad students to find, standardize, manipulate, and share data products that are existing online. We thought perhaps working with University of the Arctic on this to develop some sort of online course to better educate the up-and-coming grad students on how to access and manipulate online data sources. And then, of course, prioritize and support data rescue efforts wherever we can do that. Data access in general, created a catalog of catalogs. EarthCube is working in this area, but how, where to get buy-in from the Arctic community on this. Need a cross-sector approach, bringing together physical, biological sciences, industry, and so on. And then promote IPY data management group outcomes that were already established with other sectors to better enable data access. Yeah, that's it.
Really good, thanks. Any, I forgot to ask maybe for group one, sorry, but any either urgent questions or points that weren't mentioned from the working group that you missed or something? So for both 1 and 2, if there's any issues that weren't, I was in 2 and I think that's a very good summary, but maybe for 1, if there was anything urgent that wasn't mentioned. Also, obviously, you'll get more time to synthesize this and provide this to the workers. Nope. Okay, so I'll have rapporteur issue, Mary Beth. You look like you're ready. Okay. Okay. So you have a choice to stay here with us or to go.
I like to stay
That's
here
not
with
you. I
guys.
was talking to David. And you can come here.
Okay, so our theme was observing system design and coordination, which was a little daunting. So starting with number 1, priorities, session 1, priorities for observing system, design. We talked a little bit about whether the white papers identified top priority issues and questions, and we didn't get into that in a lot of detail. We did find a few things that rose to the surface. One, that with respect to community observations or community-based programs, they should be community-driven. Interoperability needs to be built into the design, as does data management. And we actually had a fairly long discussion about data, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Then we talked a little bit about what can we do to improve observing system design. There's a lot of discussion about the fact that there are a lot of platforms out there already. They already exist, whether they're floating or terrestrial or other sort of atypical platforms. And that one thing we ought to be thinking about is how these can be used more creatively and by a broader spectrum of the observing community to address new problems and particularly be expanded to become more multidisciplinary. We also talked a fair bit about the role of existing data and data rescue in observing system design and how to access that data, whether it's data from the terrestrial stations or wherever, but the fact that if there's a lot of information out there that's missing, it will actually hinder our ability to design improved systems. So critical issues, what's missing? Well, again, this came back to the data discussion. Does the lack of access to old data inhibit system design? Is it impacting our ability to coordinate better? Probably. And if you're going to build an observing system, you have to think from the beginning where the data is going to reside over the long term so that the system can continue to evolve. One thing that we talked about with respect to just sort of general principles of design is that if thinking about pan-Arctic observing, we might also be wanting to think about building systems that address common or expanding existing systems to address issues that are common at the pan-Arctic scale, or so in that sense societally relevant. Oh God, 1 minute, 37 seconds, okay. And then a few other kinds of things. One issue we identified was that a lot of observations are seasonally restricted. So for example, a lot of ocean obs are from the summertime only, same with terrestrial obs, vegetation, and so we need to think about ways the system can capture larger parts of the year, and that may mean downscaling to local observers for some pieces that we haven't necessarily thought about, or upscaling for others. Okay. So some recommendations in no particular order. We should be starting to think about exploring funding from the private sector to develop, implement, and sustain observing technology. It was suggested actually that governments at the governmental or intergovernmental level, that this might be mandated as a condition of gaining, for example, a leasehold on development, that there is I hesitate to use the T word, but I will, tax, that would go be directed towards infrastructure and observing activities. We should be, and we are, in the context of the Observing Summit, regularly reviewing the observing programs to see how they best fit with societal and scientific needs, and use that to improve coordination and design. And there are about 5 others for this one, but I kind of want to move on to session 2, where we talked about some issues in collaboration and coordination. And of course, among the most pressing issues we identified was the absence of data from Russia and Russian participation. And we see that as we see that as a priority for the AOS 2014. Also, another issue is connecting the downscale sort of community-based monitoring initiatives to the more upscale modeling activities. So that's a problem. Another pressing issue was better engagement of the private sector, so I'm happy to hear that both previous groups had addressed that. Also was noted that a lot of intergovernmental agreements or government-to-government agreements we have for access and sharing are often actually pretty toothless, and where the real collaboration and interaction occurs is at the project level. And so something needs to be done about that. We talked a fair bit about initiatives coming out of the Arctic Council that might provide low-hanging fruit for implementing some observing system activities, and particularly search and rescue. And then finally, just to give some ideas about solutions, we talked about the existing platforms and the fact that we should be maybe setting up a framework where we can actively engage at the local level people in using those platforms and collecting information, and also to some extent, and I'm going to put my anthropologist hat on here, giving people ownership over those facilities that would allow us to continue to use them in a more fruitful way, even in the absence of a lot of big piles of money. And then we talked about the need to keep track of who's doing inventories of what to avoid duplication of effort. So, for example, the ICC is doing an inventory of community-based monitoring activities. I think it would be important to know that so that somebody else doesn't go off and do that. So what we're really thinking about is an inventory of inventories. That would help us better frame ops. And I'll just stop. I'm not done, but we'll distribute it all, I guess, at some point.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. No, that's not my agenda. Sorry. You want it? I'll get you an agenda.
You can bring this. Thanks. So if we can have the next rapporteur, please. Thank you, Mary Beth. And by the way, if you're coming back to Canada and you're on Canada, you're allowed to use the word tax.
All right.
Yeah. Just grab the stick. Yeah, that's yours. Thanks.
I've been trained over the last 14 years. There you go.
You all right?
Yeah, I need.
No pressure.
So I will give you a short overview about what we discussed in the work group 4, which is also observing system design and coordination. We started also to discuss along these questions, and then quite quickly figured out that it is too detailed, and that we would like to have a more general approach. One result and recommendation for the Arctic Observing Summit, which came out of our discussion, is that it would be good to develop a 4-dimensional matrix as one of the recent and also future tasks. And this matrix should include information on where we are measuring, who measures what is measured, and when it is measured. And this has to be decided on each observation system, and should also include input from the scientific community, the local communities, and the private sector. We identified as major gaps, as already said before, for example, that we do not have so close links to the private sector. And another gap, which was obvious for us, was that Russia was completely missing here on this summit. So for the future summit, should be somehow achieved that there's a bigger participation of Russian scientists and decision makers. Everything is written down here in the text, what we discussed in detail, so I will go on to session 2. We discussed mostly 2 points within session 2. This is the network design and planning. There again, we stated that we need a much better coordination between the private sector and the academia, where we are measuring and what we are measuring, and that we need a system approach and an integrating assessment of data, and very important, a common place where this information is collected and made available. And the second topic where we discussed quite a long time on is the funding issue. We all are aware that observation needs long-term funding and not only project funding, and observation should be seen as a public good to achieve really a long-term funding. And we see the ESFI process, which is taking place in the European Union, as a good example how a joint funding of platforms, for example, and Arctic observing systems could be achieved also on an international basis. That's it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any questions or additional comments from this subgroup? No. Thank you. So next, I think we're up to group number 5.
Okay, we had group number 5, which focused on stakeholder perspectives. And we had a very lively and interesting conversation about it. We started out by deciding that we couldn't really evaluate or prioritize the white papers because we wanted to first have more of an understanding about what the framework was in order to assess the white papers that we were given and define who the stakeholders were. And I know this comes up a lot. There were very limited number of inputs from the stakeholders group. So there were 8, as Mary Beth summarized earlier, and they were more complementary than had an overall focus to them. Although they were undoubtedly excellent papers, we really didn't get a breadth of what the stakeholder needs were represented there. So it was very difficult to prioritize it, and so we didn't do that at all. But we did come up with some conclusions about it. One of them was that we need to engage the stakeholders more meaningfully, get their input, and understand the scales from local to Pan-Arctic that they're interested in, because we just didn't have that information. And through this process, you would be able to improve things like access, sustainability, funding mechanisms, and kind of the rest of the hit list that was put out in the charge. So we wanted to define the stakeholder. Was such a diversity and different levels of stakeholders, from local to regional to global, with different spatial and temporal scales, that the fact that ultimately everybody is connected to the Arctic is a stakeholder, but we wanted to have more of a breakdown of who these stakeholder groups are, how they're impacted, and what questions they need to have answered, and the data that they need to have to answer them. So we talked about that a lot. What perspectives are the stakeholders coming from? Are they all approaching the Arctic in the same ways? What defines their priorities and needs? And what socially relevant information do they need? We need to have international cooperation between stakeholders and to get data from other countries that might be meaningful from stakeholders in a different region. We need to have good relations at every level for exchanges of not only data, but of people, instrumentation, and other things that are part of a network. We talked about making the observations that are taken be usable for stakeholders and what that would incorporate, not just providing data files, but actual translations into information that is usable. And then, so basically one of the recommendations was to have a more comprehensive knowledge of who the stakeholders are, what their needs are, and I think this has been done in other forums as well. So I think the story continues on stakeholders. And I have 33 seconds to cede.
Thank you. Any comments, added comments from that subgroup? No? Yeah.
Actually, I'm not from that subgroup. That's something that I didn't mention in our group was the recommendation that we actually do an assessment of what kinds of stakeholders there are and what kinds of information they need in advance of the next summit.
Thank you.
Good. May I ask the next rapporteur, please?
Okay, is this on? I'm reporting back for Group 6 on Session 1, and I think a lot of our perspectives were shared with Group 5 regarding the stakeholders, and that was really the emphasis of our group as well. We focused, I'm just sort of presenting the real highlights here. One of those was the challenge of, I guess, dealing with these differences in spatiotemporal scales between models and observations and stakeholder needs, and I think the other group sort of pinched on that as well. We also discussed how uncertainty related to observations are oftentimes poorly communicated or difficult to communicate with stakeholders, and really in the effect of uncertainty as it's transferred to decision making, at least in the Arctic, is probably poorly studied to elsewhere. I think we also supported this idea of a survey prior to the next summit. We really need to know who the stakeholders are and how their interests are or are not being met. So it was kind of difficult to extract that information very quickly from the white papers as presented. For question 2, and this is concerning the sort of critical issues that we felt were missing, and this touches on the previous point that I made, is that really there's a lack of a sort of a formal approach, at least to our knowledge, adopted so far, to really understand and sort of make that formal survey of what stakeholders' needs are. A suggestion was made that this actually could be a really interesting graduate student topic. Not that I'm defraying another task onto a graduate student, but I think it really would be an interesting exercise. There's definitely a need for more communication with stakeholders, and then there was an example brought up of a position somewhat described as an environmental change officer, which could be used in villages, for example, to rapidly communicate observations of change or an awareness of change going on elsewhere that should be made sort of, or raised, at least the importance of that raised locally. I think there's definitely a need to engage the next generation in a way that has not been presented to date. There was, just again quickly glancing at the white papers, very few of them really had an action plan to sort of transform sort of the knowledge of how to do observational science to the next generation. Many of the efforts in the white papers, and I think generally in our community, focus on sort of areas that are undergoing environmental change, not areas that are not undergoing environmental change, and arguably that's also very interesting measurements and a degree of understanding that could enhance why change is going on in another place. We also, I guess, felt that it was that we're aware of the need for more and improved baseline data, but that was not often presented in the white papers as a fundamental need to include in sort of within to, I guess, enhance the observation system in the future. The benefits of potentially using crowdsourcing to engage and deliver information to stakeholders didn't really sort of float to the top for the majority of the white papers, yet it could have been applied in many of those tools. And our primary audience for recommendations we thought were funding agencies, decision makers, program operators and regulating agencies. So we didn't really address question 3. We had far too broad a range of disciplines represented and really didn't have the time to screen the white papers to the level they deserved. For session 2, we took votes on what we thought were most important issues. And really the leaders there with network design and planning with 6 votes and funding with 6 votes as well. All the rest were sort of well down on the voting list. And that's about all I had, unless anyone from the group thinks they can add to anything. Okay,
Thank you. So if I can ask second to last, number 7, please.
Okay, group number 7 was actually dealing with funding and support. And always when it comes to funding, we had quite hot discussions. But therefore, because we did not have a synthesis, because actually the funding issue was not addressed directly in white papers, we used a summary which was prepared by Peter at the beginning of today's session. And we discussed most of these issues, and we identified that we actually agree with most of them, with all of them, because those are the issues which each of us has to deal on an everyday basis in our science life. We had this was the mismatch between timescales of required time series and funding cycles, that not sufficient funding for observations, resources for operational observations, and so on. The only issue which we actually discussed a bit more, that was the estimate of total cost which is needed for a long-term observing system, which we actually did not agree that it's something which would be feasible at the moment. The group rather would recommend to do that in an iterative way together with the system design, when the elements are identified as a crucial components of the system. They also should be sort of estimate in terms of costs and priority. We actually focus on the international funding issues. And after some discussion, when we tried to find already existing model for international funding for such a global observing, or for such an observing system, we actually decided that the only one, or the best example to look for, the best model, it would be international weather. We actually we recommend to look at the international weather using WMO funding model as the model which could be used for funding the sustainable Arctic observing system. Also, after discussing what would be the main issue about improving the availability of funding, how to approach agencies and funding sources. One of the main outcomes was that we should frame networks which actually with a clearly global scale, because they seem to do better with funding at the moment. And actually we've stressed very much the globalization of the importance of the Arctic observing system, in the sense that this is not a standalone system. This is actually a key part of the global ocean, earth, atmosphere observing system. And because of that, we should try to link much closer with these global agencies and to look for possible international funding sources. The other outcome was about recommendation was about supporting the engagement of non-Arctic countries in the long-term monitoring, as global change actually is linked to the Arctic. Well, Arctic observing system is linked to the global change, which is of the interest not only for Arctic countries but also for non-Arctic countries. The recommendation from the session number 2, which actually we did not follow very strictly the points, was that the first issue to address the international coordination of Arctic observing system in terms of funding should be to prepare a map of all nations' assets and platforms to identify overlaps and gaps. So to optimize the system, to prepare inventory of already existing systems, sort of a status description of a status quo. And also what we stressed here, that the information about the foreseen or about expected lifetime of existing components, existing systems, should be attached, should be included in this inventory. That would be a crucial issue to optimize the development of the future Arctic sustained Arctic observing system, and to avoid duplication of efforts. And also there were 2 last messages from the discussions. One was that we need a very clear message, single compelling message when approaching funding agencies why we are doing that. So the key variables are very important, but when approaching on the higher level, the funding sources, we should actually we should be able to give the single message which will be adopted by all parties, which will link these key variables to a human dimension and social impact. And the last recommendation or conclusion would be that we, in terms of stakeholders' involvement, we should analyze what is important to each country, to their strategic Arctic policies, to internationalize stakeholders, and to develop the key message which will be tailored actually to stakeholder needs specific for different countries. In our opinion, that would be much more efficient than trying to use the same way, the same policy everywhere. So more or less that would be the outcome of session 7. Group 7, session 1 and 2.
Thank you. Thanks. Any comments or questions before Jackie comes and closes this thing? No? All right, thank you. Oh, there's Volker.
This actually more or less exists because Seon did this and it's written on the Seon website. At least for the European countries.
Yeah, we have discussed that actually, because I have been hurrying up so much to fit in this 2 minutes, but we have discussed what role Seon should take here, and that was very clear that part of this effort at least has been already started, and we should definitely use this for a future design of Arctic observing system.
So I'm going to tie up here with the last group was on the wrong one. For the data. Oh, thank you. We also talked about the need for apps for data collection and cloud sourcing. So we went through the aspects. We started off with discussions about the whole data diversity issue, but that we should not be replicating the data centers, and that more we should come up with some concept for a clearinghouse for the metadata associated with the observing and links, so that we just have links to national archives. So we spent some time as the room proceeded to go up to 80 degrees, what the projects would be out there, what the metadata and associated with that, inclusion of community monitoring aspects, and what we came up with 4 basically tasks. And one of them is associated with the need for a data portal, a spatial data mapping type of exercise that we would then come together with basically on a map, which would be a GIS linked, where the observing projects are, click on where the associated data sets, which just links to the archives of the National Archives. So it would not be that data would be coming into the portal, but it would be a visual, high-level visual location of the mapping throughout the regions. You could go there, you could click around the box, you could find out which of the observing, where are the data sets, and then go forward if you want to drill down into that. The Ocean Observing Network type of portal. It would be used as a communication and also an assessment type of a stock tool of where the observing programs were at. The second thing is we decided we needed to identify some case studies of where we could evaluate the metadata and the data for observing projects that have been successful or ones that could be facilitated. We then bounced around some ideas from the International Tundra Experiment, the ITACs, maybe using a case studies for ITP Argo, the COM, INTERACT, the Distributed Biological Observatory. But then we came to the point that, in fact, it wasn't just the big programs that we started to focus on just the physics, but in fact, if you're going to build a case study to look at the success of a metadata data, you need to look across the disciplines and pick a few of those. And so we didn't get to that point, but that the data, metadata that comes in that should be a tag that they're part of the observing system so that they can then be cross-link interoperable if people are looking in different data archives. So one of the key tasks that we said that really came out besides the mapping was that we want to recommend the development of open data access guidelines. It's not a policy, it's a guideline. They're recommending to stand up a group from the AOS to develop this best practice document that would explicitly include community-based observing and indigenous community input, prepare that guideline to be presented at AOS in Helsinki, and then pass that as a guideline to or work with SEON that can then be the facilitator of getting that into the international community via the Arctic Council and then the non-Arctic countries too. So that was our task 4. Finally, there was the need for visualization products, but the concern was that they go visual with the rapid change in the Arctic, they change quickly, and that somebody needs to monitor that type of thing and the access for those products on the website. And then they're brought forward to the Belmont Forum an upcoming potential e-call that could facilitate actually a mapping exercise as well as development of best practice. And with that, I've got 18 seconds. I'm done.
Thanks, Jackie. Any questions or comments for Jackie? Thank you. Any questions or comments in general? I mean, thank you. I would like to thank all the rapporteurs and the chairs in the group for, I know there was a very, very quick turnaround, and again, you had the least time, you'll get more time tomorrow, but it's difficult to synthesize all these ideas and comments. That will be done, I heard, I don't know if it's you, Craig, or something, but some of the organizers, excluding me, are going to wrap this up, I guess, or synthesize this, and you'll start the day tomorrow with some type of a little synthesis. Tomorrow the meeting will start at 9 o'clock. It will be a similar type of day with different working groups, same working groups, different sessions. If by any chance, I don't know, yesterday or actually very early this morning, I think some people, including Mary Beth, put up the working groups together by looking at different people, trying to have good representation. If you feel that your working group was missing, you know, whether it's industry, some type of stakeholders was heavily biased towards oceans or et cetera, there is some flexibility. We certainly would like to keep the same working group to create this sort of ambiance and camaraderie, and I think they're going to get better as we go. But if there are some gaps, for sure we can shuffle them around. Same if you didn't like your chair or moderator, just tell us and we can switch them. But that means you are volunteering to be that moderator or chair. But I think things went well today as far as I can see. And we're reconvening tomorrow. Right now, even though I see a lot of jet lag effect and nodding heads, something that will wake you up, there's the poster session, and actually there's quite a few posters, very interesting posters that are pretty complementary examples of observing systems and new ideas. A great opportunity to chat, plus there's a cash bar and food. That's always good to help with the networking. And I guess tonight you're all free to do whatever you want. Do you have something to say, Mary Beth? Oh, please, I'm done. I'm just filling time because the bar's not ready. Oh, no, but it's... So just tonight is also a great opportunity to continue some of these discussions if you have subgroups. I know there's many side meetings going on this week. But we reconvene at a pretty decent hour of 9 o'clock tomorrow morning in this room for plenary. So Mary Beth?
Just quickly, for everyone that spoke today in the plenary session or with the summaries, we've been making video, and we'd like to put this on the website for the AOS to make the proceedings available to the widest possible audience. So if you have any objections to us posting your talk, please tell me, and we won't do it. Otherwise, silence shall be acknowledged as acceptance. And that's it, I think. Anything else? Okay. You're free to go.